The dust from the mob's boots had barely settled when Willa Bennett realized they meant to kill her, not just drive her from White Oaks, New Mexico territory. And that changed everything about how fast she needed to run. She had buried her husband Thomas 3 weeks prior, the fever taking him so quickly that the doctor barely had time to shake his head before presenting her with a bill she could not pay. Thomas had been a good man, honest and hardworking, but he had also been a gambler with more optimism than sense. The debts he left behind came crawling out of the woodwork like termites, each creditor more insistent than the last, and when she could not produce the money they claimed was owed, the whispers started. First, they said she had poisoned Thomas for an inheritance that did not exist. Then they said she was a witch who brought bad luck to any man who crossed her path. The most vicious rumors, spread by Martha Cunningham, whose own husband had made inappropriate advances toward Willa just days after the funeral, claimed she was running a brothel from her small home on the edge of town. None of it was true, but truth mattered little when fear and righteousness mixed with the particular brand of cruelty that frontier towns could muster. The sheriff, a weak man named Donald Price who owed his position to the town council rather than any merit, had come to her door that morning with an ultimatum. Leave by sundown, or they would remove her by force. She had packed what little she owned into a worn carpetbag, sold her wedding ring to the assayer for a fraction of its worth, and started walking north on the road out of town, just as the sun began its descent toward the Capitan Mountains. She had made it perhaps 2 miles when she heard the horses behind her. There were 6 of them, led by Jacob Thornton, the banker who held most of Thomas's gambling markers. Beside him rode Martha's husband George, the blacksmith's son Billy, and 3 ranch hands from the Triple Bar spread who looked like they had been drinking since noon. They were not coming to escort her peacefully to the county line. Willa left the road and ran. Her skirts caught on sagebrush and her boots, meant for keeping house rather than fleeing across open desert, rubbed blisters on her heels within minutes. The sun was a dying red ember on the horizon, casting long shadows that made every rock and cactus look like a crouching animal. She could hear them behind her, whooping and calling out suggestions of what they might do when they caught her, each one worse than the last. Her lungs burned and her legs trembled, but she kept running, clutching her carpetbag to her chest like a child clutches a doll. She stumbled down into a dry wash, loose stones sliding under her feet, and for a moment she thought she might escape into the gathering darkness. Then a rope sailed over her head and pulled tight around her shoulders, yanking her backward onto the hard ground. The air left her lungs in a painful rush. Stars danced in her vision as rough hands grabbed her arms, hauling her to her feet. Jacob Thornton's face loomed close, his breath reeking of whiskey and tobacco. Thought you could just walk away from your debts, did you? He snarled, his fingers digging into her arm hard enough to bruise. Your husband owed me $300, and I mean to collect one way or another. I do not have it, Willa gasped, trying to pull free. I sold everything. There is nothing left. Oh, I think you have got plenty left to offer, George Cunningham said, his smile making her stomach turn. A young widow, all alone, no family to speak of. Seems to me you could work off that debt real personal-like. The other men laughed, moving closer, forming a circle around her. Willa looked from face to face, seeing nothing but cruelty and lust and the particular cowardice of men who only felt brave in numbers. She opened her mouth to scream, though she knew there was no one to hear her this far from town. The gunshot cracked across the desert like thunder, echoing off the distant mountains. The men froze, their heads snapping toward the sound. A second shot kicked up dust at Jacob Thornton's feet, making him stumble backward with a curse. "The lady seems disinclined to your company, gentlemen." The voice came from the rim of the wash, calm and steady as church bells on Sunday morning. "I suggest you mount up and ride back the way you came." Willa twisted in George's grip, looking up toward the voice. A man sat astride a paint horse on the edge of the wash, silhouetted against the last light of day. He held a rifle across his saddle, and even from this distance she could see it was pointed directly at Jacob Thornton's chest. "This is none of your concern, stranger," Jacob called out, trying to sound authoritative and failing. "This woman owes debts to the town of White Oaks, and we are here to see justice done." "Looks more like 6 men chasing down one woman in the desert," the stranger replied. "Where I come from, we call that something other than justice." He worked the lever on his rifle, the metallic sound carrying clearly in the still evening air. "Now, I am going to count to 3. If you are still standing there when I finish, I am going to start putting holes in expensive horseflesh, and we will see how brave you feel walking back to town." "You cannot shoot all of us," Billy said, but his voice shook. "No, but I can shoot 3 of you before you clear leather, and I am betting none of you wants to be in that number." The stranger's horse shifted, and Willa caught a better glimpse of him. He was young, perhaps 25, with dark hair that curled at his collar and a face that might have been handsome if it were not set in such hard lines. "1." George's grip on Willa's arm loosened slightly. The ranch hands were already backing toward their horses, whatever courage the whiskey had given them evaporating like morning dew. 2. "This is not over," Jacob hissed at Willa, but he was moving away, his eyes on the rifle that tracked his movement. "You think hiding behind some drifter is going to save you? We will find you again." 3. The men scrambled for their horses, stumbling over each other in their haste. Within seconds, they were mounted and spurring their horses back toward town, leaving nothing but dust and the echo of hoofbeats. Willa stood alone in the wash, her legs shaking so badly she thought they might give out beneath her. The stranger urged his paint horse down the slope, the animal picking its way carefully over the loose rock. Up close, Willa could see he was taller than she had thought, lean and rangy in the way of men who spent their lives in the saddle. He wore a battered hat, a faded blue shirt, and a gun belt that looked well used. His eyes were gray, the color of smoke or storm clouds, and they studied her with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "You hurt, madam?" he asked, swinging down from his horse with easy grace. Willa shook her head, not trusting her voice. Her arm throbbed where George had grabbed her, and she knew she would have bruises tomorrow, but nothing was broken. The stranger picked up her carpet bag from where it had fallen and held it out to her. "Thank you," she managed, taking the bag with trembling hands. "They would have killed me." "Yes, madam, I expect they might have." He looked back toward town, his jaw tight. Those men have the look of a mob about them, and mobs do not tend toward rational thinking. "You should not have interfered," Willa said, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. "They will remember your face. If you ever ride through White Oaks, they will cause you trouble." "Then I suppose I will ride around White Oaks from now on." He smiled, and the expression softened his features, made him look younger. "I am Patrick Ives, madam. Most folks call me Patrick." "Willa Bennett." She hesitated, then added, "Widow Bennett, I suppose, though that seems to be the source of all my current troubles." "A widow," Patrick repeated, something shifting in his expression. "And they chased you out of town for it." "They chased me out for debts my husband left behind, and for refusing to pay them in the manner they suggested." Willa felt heat rise in her cheeks despite the cooling evening air. "And for rumors that have no basis in truth, but which make for entertaining gossip over Sunday dinner." Patrick was quiet for a moment, studying her face in the fading light. Then he said, "I have a proposition for you, Mrs. Bennett, and I would appreciate it if you would hear me out before you answer." Willa tensed, her mind already racing through possibilities, each one worse than the last. She had been alone with this stranger for less than 5 minutes, and already she was at his mercy just as surely as she had been at the mercy of the men from town. If he meant to hurt her, there was nothing she could do to stop him. "I run a small ranch about 30 miles north of here, near the base of the mountains," Patrick continued, apparently oblivious to her fear. "It is not much, just a few hundred head of cattle and some land that is more rock than grass, but it is mine, bought and paid for with money I saved working as a scout for the army. I have been trying to run it myself, but the truth is I need help. I need someone who can cook and keep house, someone who can help with the books and manage supplies, someone who knows how to work hard and is not afraid of a challenge." "You want to hire me?" Willa asked, surprised. "I want to offer you a place to stay and work to keep you fed," Patrick said carefully. "I cannot pay much in terms of cash money, but I can offer room and board and a safe place to sleep at night. It is honest work, Mrs. Bennett, and I give you my word that I will treat you with respect." It was too good to be true, which meant it probably was. Willa had learned that lesson the hard way over the past 3 weeks. Men did not help women out of the goodness of their hearts, not without expecting something in return. And yet, what choice did she have? She had $10 to her name, no family within 500 miles, and a town full of people who wanted her dead or worse. "Why?" she asked bluntly. "Why would you help me? You do not know me. I could be everything they say I am." Patrick shrugged, the gesture casual but his eyes serious. "I watched 6 armed men chase down a woman half their size and corner her in a wash. Whatever you might be, they were worse. That is enough for me." He paused, then added, "Besides, my mother died 2 years ago, and I have been living on burned bacon and stale bread ever since. I figure even if you turn out to be a terrible cook, you can hardly be worse than me." Despite everything, Willa felt a laugh bubble up in her chest. It came out shaky and a little wild, but it was genuine. Patrick smiled again, and she realized he had meant to make her laugh, had said it specifically to ease the tension that stretched between them. "I am a good cook," she said, "and I can keep books. My father was a clerk in St. Louis before he died, and he taught me figures and letters." "Then it seems we might be able to help each other." Patrick offered his hand, and after a moment, Willa took it. His grip was warm and calloused, the hand of a working man. "What do you say, Mrs. Bennett? Are you willing to take a chance on a stranger?" She thought about White Oaks, about the empty house where Thomas had died, about Jacob Thornton's cruel eyes and George Cunningham's grabbing hands. She thought about walking alone through the desert with $10 and no destination, about what would happen when the money ran out and the next town proved no more welcoming than the last. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will come with you." Patrick nodded, satisfied, and turned back to his horse. "Can you ride?" "Not well," Willa admitted. "Thomas never saw the need to teach me." "That is all right. You can ride with me until we get to the ranch." He swung up into the saddle, then offered her his hand. "It is not far, just a few hours if we keep a steady pace. We will be there well before midnight." Willa hesitated only a moment before taking his hand. He pulled her up behind him with surprising strength, settling her on the horse's back as easily as if she weighed nothing. She had never ridden astride before, had always used a side saddle on the rare occasions when riding was necessary, and the position felt strange and immodest. But she wrapped her arms around Patrick's waist as he instructed, holding her carpetbag in one hand and gripping his shirt with the other, and tried not to think about how close she was pressed against him. "Hold tight," Patrick said, and urged the paint horse into a smooth walk. They rode north as the stars came out overhead, great glittering fields of them brighter than Willa had ever seen in town. The desert cooled quickly once the sun disappeared, and she was grateful for the warmth of Patrick's back against her chest. He did not speak much as they rode, only occasionally pointing out landmarks or warning her when the terrain grew rough, and she appreciated the silence. Her mind was too full of everything that had happened to make conversation. She had been married to Thomas for 2 years, and in that time she had tried to be a good wife. She had kept their small house clean, cooked his meals, mended his clothes, and never complained when he came home late from the saloon smelling of whiskey and cards. She had even tried to love him, though in truth they had been strangers who shared a bed and little else. Her parents had arranged the marriage before they died of cholera, and Thomas had seemed like a good prospect, a man with ambition and plans for the future. But Thomas's plans had all been built on sand, and when the fever took him, everything collapsed. She had spent the first week after his death in a haze of grief and shock, not for the man he was, but for the life she had thought she would have. Then the creditors had started coming, and grief had turned to fear, and fear to desperation. Now here she was, riding through the night with a man she had met less than an hour ago, trusting her life to his promise of honest work and safe shelter. It was either the bravest or most foolish thing she had ever done, and she would not know which until it was far too late to change her mind. "There," Patrick said, breaking the long silence. He pointed ahead, where a dark shape rose against the slightly lighter sky. "That is home." As they drew closer, Willa could make out the details. The ranch house was small, built of rough timber and adobe, with a covered porch that ran along the front. Behind it stood a barn that looked slightly newer than the house, and beyond that she could see the dark shapes of cattle moving in a fenced pasture. It was modest, almost primitive compared to the house she had shared with Thomas in town, but something about it appealed to her. It looked solid, permanent, like it had grown up out of the earth rather than being built upon it. Patrick brought the horse to a stop in front of the house and dismounted, then helped Willa down. Her legs were stiff from the ride, and she stumbled slightly as her feet hit the ground. He caught her elbow, steadying her, then released her quickly as if afraid she might think he was taking liberties. "I know it is not much," he said, sounding almost apologetic, "but it keeps the rain out and the well water is sweet. There is a bedroom that was my mother's. You can have that. I sleep out in the barn most nights anyway, keep an ear out for coyotes and rustlers." "It is fine," Willa said and meant it. "Better than fine." Patrick led her inside and lit a lantern, revealing a single large room that served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all at once. It was clean but sparse, with a stone fireplace at one end and a dry sink at the other. A rough table and 2 chairs sat in the middle, and a rocking chair that had seen better days occupied the corner near the fireplace. Everything spoke of function over comfort, a man's space without a woman's touch. "The bedroom is through there," Patrick said, nodding toward a door on the far wall. "There should be clean sheets in the chest at the foot of the bed. I know you are probably tired, but if you are hungry, there is salt pork in the larder and some beans. I am afraid that is about the extent of my provisions at the moment." "I can make do," Willa said. "Thank you, Mr. Ives, for everything." "Patrick," he corrected gently. "And you are welcome, Mrs. Bennett. I know this has been a difficult day for you, and I am sorry for that. But I meant what I said about honest work and respectful treatment. You have my word on that." He touched the brim of his hat and left, the door closing softly behind him. Willa stood alone in the lamplight, listening to his footsteps cross the porch and fade toward the barn. Only then did she allow herself to sink into the rocking chair, her bag clutched to her chest, and let the tears come. She cried for Thomas, for the marriage that had never been what she hoped. She cried for her parents, dead these 5 years, and for the home in St. Louis she would never see again. She cried for the fear and humiliation of being chased through the desert, for the bruises on her arm and the terror that still made her hands shake. And finally, she cried from sheer exhaustion, from the overwhelming weight of being 22 years old and alone in the world except for the charity of a stranger. When the tears finally stopped, she felt hollowed out but oddly calm. She washed her face in water from the bucket by the sink, found the bedroom Patrick had mentioned, and discovered that it was small but clean, with a real bed and a window that looked east toward the mountains. The sheets in the chest smelled of lavender, as if Patrick's mother had stored them with dried flowers, and Willa made up the bed with hands that had stopped trembling. She did not bother to change into a nightgown, simply removed her boots and lay down fully clothed, too tired to care about propriety. Sleep took her almost instantly, a deep dreamless void that swallowed her whole. She woke to birdsong and sunlight streaming through the window, momentarily disoriented. Then memory returned in a rush and she sat up, looking around the unfamiliar room with wide eyes. A gentle knock sounded at the door. "Mrs. Bennett, I've got coffee on if you would like some." Patrick's voice, polite and distant, like he was addressing a schoolteacher rather than a woman who had sobbed herself to sleep under his roof. Willa pushed her hair back from her face and called out, "I will be right there." She did what she could to make herself presentable, using the water in the pitcher on the dresser to wash and finger-combing her dark hair into some semblance of order. Her dress was wrinkled and dusty from yesterday's flight, but it would have to do until she could wash her spare clothes. When she emerged, she found Patrick standing by the stove, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. "Morning," he said, offering her one. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," Willa admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. The coffee was strong and black and exactly what she needed. "Thank you." Patrick nodded and gestured to the table, where he had set out a plate with thick slices of bread and a jar of honey. "I rode into Corona yesterday to pick up supplies, so at least we have got fresh bread. Help yourself." They ate in companionable silence, and Willa found herself studying her host in the morning light. He was younger than she had initially thought, probably not more than 25 or 26, with the kind of lean build that came from hard work rather than deliberate exercise. His face was tanned from the sun, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than he frowned. There was something inherently trustworthy about him, though Willa knew that could be deceptive. Thomas had seemed trustworthy too at first. "I thought I would show you around this morning," Patrick said, breaking the silence. "Let you get a feel for the place and what needs doing. Then you can decide if you still want to stay." "I want to stay," Willa said quickly, then felt her cheeks warm. "That is, unless you have changed your mind about needing help." "Not at all." Patrick smiled, that same expression that softened his whole face. "I just want to make sure you know what you are getting into. Ranch life is not easy, especially out here where it is just the two of us. There will be long days and hard work, and sometimes we will go weeks without seeing another soul." "That sounds perfect," Willa said, and meant it. The thought of weeks without seeing anyone from White Oaks, without facing their judgment and cruelty, was more appealing than Patrick could possibly know. He showed her the ranch that morning, walking her through the barn where he kept his 2 horses, the paint she had ridden the night before, and a sturdy bay mare named Rosie. The cattle, about 300 head of mixed stock, grazed in the pastures that stretched toward the mountains. There was a chicken coop that needed repairs, a smokehouse that needed cleaning, and a vegetable garden that had been neglected into near oblivion. "I know it needs work," Patrick said, sounding apologetic. I have been focusing on the herd, trying to build up the numbers, and I have let other things slide. I can fix the garden, Willa said, already mentally cataloging what would need to be done. And the chicken coop. My mother kept chickens in St. Louis before we moved west. I know how to care for them. You are hired, Patrick said with a grin. They fell into a routine over the following days that felt surprisingly natural. Willa woke with the sun and made breakfast while Patrick tended the animals. After they ate, she would work on the house and garden while he rode out to check the herd and mend fences. They would come together again at midday for a simple meal, then return to their separate tasks until evening, when they would eat dinner and sometimes sit on the porch as the stars came out, talking about everything and nothing. Patrick was easy to talk to, Willa discovered. He had grown up in Kansas, the youngest of 4 sons, and had come west after the war to make his own way. He had worked as a cowhand, a scout for the army, and briefly as a deputy in a town up north, before saving enough money to buy this land. His mother had come to live with him after his father died, and they had built the ranch together until a sudden illness took her 2 winters past. I miss her, Patrick admitted one evening as they sat watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. She was the strongest person I ever knew, lost her husband and 3 sons in the war, but she just kept going, kept finding reasons to smile. She loved this place. It is easy to see why, Willa said softly. There is a peace here that I have not felt in a long time. Patrick glanced at her, his gray eyes thoughtful. You do not talk much about your husband. There is not much to say. Willa traced patterns in the dust with the toe of her boot. We were married because it was expected, because my parents arranged it before they died and I had nowhere else to go. Thomas was not a bad man, but he was not a particularly good one either. He liked gambling more than working, and he liked drinking more than coming home to his wife. When he died, I felt terrible for not feeling worse about it, if that makes sense. It makes sense, Patrick said quietly. You cannot mourn what you never really had. The words settled between them, profound in their simplicity. Willa found herself looking at Patrick, really looking at him, and seeing not just the man who had saved her life, but someone who might understand the complicated tangle of emotions that came with loss and relief and guilt all mixed together. What about you? She asked. Was there ever anyone you wanted to marry? Once, Patrick said, his voice distant. A girl back in Kansas before the war, but her father did not approve of a 4th son with no prospects, and by the time I came back with money saved, she was married to the banker's boy and had 3 children. I wished her well and kept moving west. Do you regret it? Not anymore. Patrick turned to look at her fully, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. I figure things work out the way they are meant to. If I had married her, I would not be here now, and you would not be here either. The weight of that statement hung in the air between them. Willa knew she should look away, should say something light to break the tension, but she found herself caught in the gravity of his eyes, in the possibility she saw there. A coyote yipped in the distance, breaking the moment. Patrick stood, stretching his long frame. I should check on the horses before it gets full dark. Sleep well, Mrs. Bennett. Willa, she said impulsively. Please call me Willa, he smiled, slow and warm. Willa then, and I am Patrick, as I keep reminding you. Patrick, she repeated, tasting his name, finding she liked the shape of it in her mouth. The days turned into weeks, and Willa threw herself into making the ranch a home. She repaired the chicken coop and convinced Patrick to buy a dozen hens from a farmer in Corona. She resurrected the vegetable garden, planting beans and squash and tomatoes in neat rows. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, scrubbing years of bachelor grime from every surface, and sewed curtains for the windows from fabric. she found in a trunk that had belonged to Patrick's mother. Patrick, for his part, seemed amazed by the transformation. He would come in from a long day working the herd to find fresh bread on the table, his clothes mended and folded, wildflowers in a jar by the window. More than once she caught him just standing in the doorway, looking around with an expression of wonder on his face. "It has not looked like this since before Ma died," he said one evening, his voice thick with emotion. "I forgot what it felt like to have a home instead of just a place to sleep." "It is what you hired me for," Willa said, though they both knew it had become more than that somewhere along the way hired help had shifted into something neither of them was quite ready to name. They were careful with each other, scrupulously proper in their interactions. Patrick never came into the house without knocking first, never touched her beyond the occasional brush of hands when passing dishes at dinner. Willa kept to her room at night, kept her dresses modest and her hair pinned up, maintained all the proprieties her mother had taught her. But the awareness was there, growing stronger with each passing day. She noticed the way his eyes followed her when he thought she was not looking, the way his voice softened when he spoke her name. She caught herself watching for him in the evenings, listening for the sound of his boots on the porch, finding excuses to brush past him in the small kitchen. It frightened her, this growing feeling. She had married once for practical reasons, and it had ended in disaster. The thought of risking her heart again, especially when she was so dependent on Patrick's goodwill, seemed impossibly foolish. And yet she could not seem to stop herself from caring, from noticing the way his hair curled at his collar when it needed cutting, from memorizing the sound of his laugh. The first real test of their arrangement came 6 weeks after she had arrived, when a group of riders appeared on the horizon. Willa was working in the garden when she saw them, and her blood went cold. She dropped her basket of beans and ran for the house, her heart hammering. Patrick was in the barn, and she called for him as she ran. He emerged at once, saw her face, and his hand went to the gun at his hip. "How many?" he asked, all business. 5, maybe 6, coming from the south." Patrick's jaw tightened. "Get in the house. Take the rifle from over the mantel and load it. If shooting starts, you stay down and do not come out unless I call for you." "Patrick, go, Willa, now." She went, her hands shaking as she took down the rifle and checked that it was loaded. Through the window she watched Patrick walk out to meet the riders, his posture deceptively relaxed, but his hand never far from his gun. The riders pulled up about 20 yards from the house. Willa recognized them immediately, her stomach sinking. Jacob Thornton sat his horse in the center of the group, flanked by George Cunningham and 4 men she did not recognize. They all wore guns, and they all looked angry. "You have got something that belongs to White Oaks," Jacob called out, not bothering with pleasantries. "We have come to collect." "I have got cattle that belong to me, grass that belongs to me, and a house that belongs to me," Patrick replied evenly. "Nothing here belongs to White Oaks or anyone in it." "The widow owes debts," George said, his horse dancing sideways. "We have come to see those debts paid." "Mrs. Bennett works for me now," Patrick said. "Any debts you claim she owes are between you and her late husband, and last I checked, you cannot collect debts from a dead man." "We can collect from his widow," Jacob snarled. "That is the law." "That is your interpretation of the law," Patrick corrected. "Mine says a woman is not responsible for debts she did not incur. But I will tell you what. You produce proof of these debts, real legal documentation showing what was owed and to whom, and bring it to a proper court of law, and we will see what a judge has to say about it." The men shifted in their saddles, exchanging glances. Willa realized with a start that they had no real proof, that Thomas's debts had been based on handshakes and verbal agreements, the kind of arrangements men made over cards and whiskey that would never hold up in court. "We do not need a judge to handle our business," one of the strangers said. "We take care of our own in White Oaks." "Well, you are not in White Oaks anymore," Patrick said, and his voice hardened. "You are on my land, and I am telling you to leave. You have got to the count of 10 to turn those horses around, or I am going to start shooting." "There are 6 of us," Jacob pointed out, "and only one of you." "2," Willa said, stepping out onto the porch with the rifle leveled at Jacob's chest. Her voice did not shake, though her hands wanted to. "2 of us, and we are on our own land with every right to defend it. You are trespassing, and we would be well within our legal rights to shoot you and leave you for the buzzards." The men stared at her, clearly not having expected her to show herself, much less armed. Patrick glanced back at her, something that might have been pride flickering in his eyes, but he did not tell her to go back inside. "The lady makes a good point," he said mildly. "Now, are you leaving, or do we have a problem?" For a long moment nobody moved. Then Jacob swore and yanked his horse's head around. "This is not over. We will be back with the law, proper documentation, everything legal and above board." "You do that," Patrick said. "I am sure the territorial judge will be very interested to hear about 6 armed men chasing a widow through the desert. Very interested indeed." The threat landed. Jacob's face went red, but he spurred his horse into a trot, the others following. They watched until the riders disappeared over a rise. Then Patrick turned to Willa. "You can put the rifle down now," he said gently. Willa realized she was still pointing it at where Jacob had been, her finger on the trigger. She lowered it carefully, her hand starting to shake now that the danger had passed. Patrick took the rifle from her and set it aside, then put his hands on her shoulders. "Are you all right?" he asked, his face close to hers, his eyes searching. "I think so," Willa managed. "I just knew that if they took me back, if you let them take me, I would rather die here than go with them." Something shifted in Patrick's expression, raw and fierce. "I would never let them take you," he said, his voice low and intense. "Never, Willa. You ride with me now. They want to get to you. They will have to go through me first, and I promise you that will not be easy." The words hung between them, charged with meaning beyond their literal content. Willa became acutely aware of his hands on her shoulders, the warmth of them through her dress, the way his thumbs moved in small circles as if to soothe her. She could see the pulse beating in his throat, could smell leather and horses and the sage-scented soap he used. "Patrick," she whispered, not sure what she was asking for. He leaned closer, his breath warm on her face, and for a heartbeat she thought he was going to kiss her. Then he stepped back abruptly, releasing her shoulders, putting proper distance between them. "I should ride into Corona," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Let the sheriff know what happened here. Get ahead of whatever story Jacob might tell. Will you be all right here alone for a few hours?" Willa nodded, not trusting her voice. Patrick gave her one more long look, then went to saddle his horse. She watched him ride out, her heart still racing, one hand pressed to her chest as if to hold in all the feelings that threatened to burst free. That night they were both careful around each other, overly polite, maintaining distance. But Willa could not stop thinking about the way he had looked at her, the way he had said she rode with him now. The words echoed in her mind as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She rode with him now. It was more than a statement of protection, more than an assertion of his right to defend his household. It was a claim, a declaration that she belonged not just on his ranch but with him specifically. And God help her, she wanted it to be true. The summer deepened, heat settling over the land like a blanket. Willa and Patrick fell back into their routine, but something had changed. The awareness between them had sharpened, become impossible to ignore. They found excuses to be near each other, to work side by side on tasks that could have been done separately. Patrick taught her to ride properly, spending long evenings walking Rosie in circles around the corral, while Willa learned to control the mare with knees and reins. His hands on her waist as he helped her mount made her skin tingle. The praise in his voice when she finally managed a smooth trot made her flush with pleasure. Willa learned his habits, his preferences, the small things that made him smile. She discovered he had a sweet tooth and started baking pies and cakes whenever eggs and sugar could be spared. She noticed he favored his left shoulder on cold mornings, legacy of an old injury, and started preparing willow bark tea without being asked. She mended his clothes with increasingly careful stitches, adding small embellishments, a replaced button here, reinforced seams there, putting more care into the work than strictly necessary. They talked more too, long conversations that ranged from the practical to the philosophical. Patrick had read more than she would have expected for a cowboy, his mother having insisted on education despite their frontier circumstances. They discussed books, politics, the future of the territory, the morality of the recent conflicts with the Apache. They did not always agree, but they could argue without anger, respecting each other's perspectives. "You are different from any woman I have ever known," Patrick said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. "You are not afraid to speak your mind, to have opinions, to do hard work. Most women I have met seem to think they need to pretend to be helpless to attract a man." "Most men seem to prefer women who pretend to be helpless," Willa countered. "Thomas certainly did. He was forever telling me not to worry my pretty head about finances or politics or anything more complicated than what to cook for dinner." "Thomas was a fool," Patrick said bluntly. "A man who wants a helpless woman is a man who is afraid of an equal partner." Willa turned to look at him. "And you want an equal partner?" Patrick met her eyes steadily. "I want someone who challenges me, who makes me think, who can hold her own in a fight, whether that fight is with words or guns. I want someone I can respect, someone who respects me in return. Someone who is a partner in every sense of the word." The air between them felt charged, electric with possibility. Willa's heart hammered against her ribs. She opened her mouth, not sure what she was going to say, but Patrick stood abruptly. "I should check the horses," he said, and fled like the devil was chasing him. Willa watched him go, frustration and longing warring in her chest. She knew he felt the same pull she did, could see it in every glance, every accidental touch, every moment of charged silence. But something held him back, some sense of honor or propriety that kept him from acting on what they both felt. She wondered if it was because she was his employee, if he thought pursuing her would be taking advantage. Or if it was because she was so recently widowed, if he thought she was not ready to consider another man. Or perhaps he simply did not think she would want him, could not imagine that a town woman might choose a rancher living on the edge of civilization. Whatever the reason, the tension built between them like storm clouds on the horizon, heavy with the promise of rain that never fell. The break came in late August, when Patrick was thrown from his horse chasing a runaway steer. Willa was hanging laundry when she heard Rosie's panicked whinny and looked up to see the mare galloping toward the house, saddle empty. Terror flooded through her. She dropped the wet sheet and ran, following the direction Rosie had come from. She found Patrick a quarter-mile out, lying very still on the ground, his hat a few feet away. Blood matted his dark hair on one side. "Patrick!" She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over him, afraid to touch, afraid not to. "Patrick, please wake up." He groaned, his eyes fluttering open. "Willa, I am here," she said, tears streaming down her face though she had not realized she was crying. "You are hurt. Can you move?" "Hit my head," he mumbled. Horse spooked, threw me into a rock, stupid." "You are not stupid, you are scaring me half to death," Willa said, her hands gentle as she examined the wound. It was bleeding freely but did not look too deep. "Can you stand? We need to get you back to the house." With her help, Patrick managed to get to his feet, though he swayed alarmingly. Willa got under his shoulder, taking as much of his weight as she could, and they made their slow, painful way back to the house. By the time they reached it, she was trembling with effort and Patrick's face was gray with pain. She got him to his bed in the barn loft, where he usually slept, and went to work cleaning the wound. It took forever, her hands shaking, terrified that she was going to hurt him worse. Patrick bore it in silence except for the occasional hiss of pain. "You should be in the house," he said as she bandaged his head. "Not out here taking care of me." "Be quiet and let me work," Willa said, more sharply than she intended. Fear made her voice harsh. "You scared me, Patrick. When I saw Rosie without you, I thought," her voice broke. Patrick's hand came up to catch hers. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "I am all right, Willa, just a knock on the head." "You could have died," she whispered. "You could have died and I would never have gotten to tell you." She stopped, the words caught in her throat. "Tell me what?" Patrick asked, his gray eyes intent on her face. "That I love you," Willa said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "That I have loved you probably since that first night when you rode up and saved my life. That the thought of losing you makes me want to die myself. That every day I spend here with you is the happiest I have ever been. And the idea that you might feel nothing for me beyond gratitude for the cooking and cleaning is a torture I can barely stand." Patrick stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, moving carefully, he sat up and cupped her face in his hands. "Nothing for you beyond gratitude," he repeated, and his laugh was a little wild. "Willa, I am half mad with wanting you. I lie awake at night thinking about you, planning ways to make you smile, counting the hours until I can see you again. The only reason I have not told you is because I was afraid you would feel obligated to return my feelings because I gave you shelter, because you needed a place to stay. I never wanted you to feel trapped." "I do not feel trapped," Willa said, her hands coming up to cover his. "I feel free for the first time in my life, free to choose to speak, to be myself. And I choose you, Patrick, if you will have me." "If I will have you," Patrick echoed. And then he was kissing her, gentle and fierce all at once, his lips warm and slightly chapped against hers. Willa kissed him back with all the pent-up longing of the past weeks, her hands sliding into his hair, careful of his injury but unable to hold back. They broke apart, both breathing hard. Patrick pressed his forehead to hers, mindful of the bandage. "Marry me," he said. "Not because you owe me anything or because you need protection or because it is practical. Marry me because you love me and I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy." "Yes," Willa said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Patrick, I will marry you." They sat there in the barn loft, holding each other as the afternoon sun slanted through the gaps in the boards, and Willa thought about how strange life was. 6 weeks ago she had been running for her life, alone and terrified. Now she was in the arms of a man who loved her, planning a future she had never dared to imagine. Patrick, despite his injury, insisted on riding into Corona the next day to speak to the circuit preacher. Willa went with him, riding Rosie while Patrick managed his paint with one hand, the other held against his still aching head. The preacher agreed to marry them the following Sunday, and they celebrated by buying supplies and a new dress for Willa from the general store, pale blue calico, that made her eyes look bright. The wedding was simple, held on the porch of the ranch house with the preacher and 2 witnesses pulled from the general store in Corona. Willa wore her new dress and wildflowers in her hair. Patrick wore his best shirt, newly mended by Willa's careful hands, and could not stop smiling. They spoke their vows as the sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Patrick kissed her thoroughly, then swept her into his arms and carried her over the threshold of the house while the witnesses cheered. It was ridiculous and wonderful, and everything Willa had never known she wanted. Their wedding night was awkward and sweet, both of them nervous despite their earlier confessions. Patrick was gentle, taking his time, making sure Willa felt safe and cherished. And when they finally came together, it was nothing like her experiences with Thomas, nothing like the dutiful coupling she had endured in her first marriage. This was something else entirely, passion and tenderness, and a connection that went deeper than flesh. Afterward, lying tangled together in the bed that was now theirs, Patrick traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "I love you," he said, simple and direct. "I will spend every day making sure you know that." "I already know it," Willa said, turning to kiss him. "I see it in everything you do, every look, every word. You make me feel precious, valued, like I matter beyond what I can do for you." "You do matter," Patrick said fiercely. "You matter more than anything." They built their life together through the fall and into winter. Patrick taught Willa to shoot properly, to rope cattle, to read the signs of weather in the clouds. Willa taught Patrick to appreciate good cooking beyond mere fuel, to take pride in a well-kept home, to find joy in small domestic pleasures. They worked the ranch together, true partners in every sense, and if the work was hard, it was also deeply satisfying. Word got back to them through travelers that Jacob Thornton had tried to bring charges against Patrick for harboring a debtor, but the territorial judge had laughed him out of court, especially when several people testified to seeing the men chase Willa into the desert. The judge had strongly suggested that the good people of White Oaks leave the Ives family alone unless they wanted a more thorough investigation into their business practices. After that, they heard no more from White Oaks. Willa was glad. That part of her life was over, dead and buried with Thomas. She was Willa Ives now, wife of Patrick Ives, rancher and partner and friend. She had never been happier. Winter was hard, as winters always were in the mountains. They spent long evenings by the fire, Patrick reading aloud from his mother's books while Willa sewed or knitted. Sometimes they would simply talk, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future. Patrick wanted to expand the herd, buy more land, maybe hire a couple of hands to help with the work. Willa wanted chickens that actually laid eggs consistently, and a proper stove instead of the temperamental fireplace. They made plans together, dreamed together, and when spring came and the snow melted, they started making those dreams real. Patrick bought 50 more head of cattle from a rancher up north. Willa ordered a cast iron stove from the catalog, a huge extravagance that made her feel ridiculously wealthy. And in April, Willa realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had not wanted to say anything until she was sure. When her courses were nearly 3 weeks late and the morning sickness started, she could no longer deny it. She told Patrick one evening as they sat on the porch, the words tumbling out in a nervous rush. Patrick stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then a smile spread across his features, so bright and joyful that it took her breath away. "A baby," he said wonderingly. He dropped to his knees in front of her chair, his hands on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Willa asked, though she could see he was. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Patrick said. He looked up at her, his gray eyes shining with tears. "You have given me everything, Willa. A home, a partnership, love, and now a family. I do not have words for what that means to me." Willa ran her fingers through his hair, her own eyes wet. "You gave me all of that first," she said. "You gave me my life, Patrick. Everything I have, everything I am now, started the night you rode up and told those men I rode with you." "You rode with me then," Patrick said, rising to kiss her gently. "And you will ride with me forever. You and our child, our family. I swear to you, Willa, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that." "I could never regret it," Willa said. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Willa continued working the ranch well into her 6th month, only stopping the heavier tasks when Patrick threatened to tie her to the porch chair. She took over the books entirely, managing the accounts and correspondence while Patrick handled the physical labor, though he was never far from the house, always checking on her, bringing her water or a snack or just stopping by to kiss her forehead. In November, with the first snow falling outside, Willa gave birth to a son. The labor was long and hard, attended by a midwife from Corona who Patrick had paid to stay at the ranch for the final month. But when it was over and the baby was placed in her arms, small and red and squalling, Willa thought she had never seen anything more beautiful. Patrick, who had paced the porch for the entire labor, was allowed in to meet his son. He took the baby with shaking hands, cradling the tiny body against his chest, and Willa watched tears stream down his face. "He is perfect," Patrick whispered. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, never quite settling on one they both loved. But looking at her husband holding their son, at the tenderness and wonder in his expression, Willa knew. "James," she said, "after your father." Patrick looked at her, his expression stunned. "Are you sure? I thought you wanted to name him after your father." "I am sure," Willa said. "Your father raised a good man, Patrick. A man I am proud to call my husband. I want our son to have that legacy." Patrick bent to kiss her, careful not to jostle the baby. "Thank you," he said against her lips. "Thank you for him, for you, for all of it." Little James was a good baby, quiet and content, with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. Patrick was besotted, spending hours just watching him sleep, holding him, talking to him about the ranch and the cattle and everything they would do together when James was older. Willa watched her husband become a father and fell in love with him all over again. He was gentle and patient, unafraid of the messy realities of infant care, changing diapers and walking the floor at night when James fussed. He sang to their son in a surprisingly good voice, old songs his mother had taught him, lullabies that made Willa's eyes sting with their sweetness. The ranch continued to prosper. Patrick hired 2 hands the following spring, young men from Corona who were willing to work hard for fair wages. With their help, the herd grew to nearly 500 head, and Patrick was able to negotiate a good price with the army, supplying beef to Fort Stanton. Willa expanded the garden and started selling vegetables and eggs to the general store in Corona. She also began taking in mending and sewing from women in town, not because they needed the money, but because she enjoyed the work and the connection to other people. Slowly, carefully, she was building a community, friendships that had nothing to do with her past in White Oaks and everything to do with who she was now. James grew into a sturdy toddler, then a curious child, following his father around the ranch and trying to help with every task. Patrick was endlessly patient, teaching him to ride, to rope, to care for the animals. And when James was 3, Willa gave birth to a daughter, Emma, who had her mother's eyes and her father's smile. Life was full and rich and sometimes exhausting, but Willa would not have changed a moment of it. She had everything she had ever wanted and so much more she had never thought to dream of. A husband who loved her, children who brought joy to every day, work that satisfied her, a home that was truly hers. Sometimes, in quiet moments, She would think back to that night in the desert, to the terror and desperation of being chased from white oaks. She would remember the sound of gunfire, the sight of Patrick silhouetted against the dying light, the words that had changed everything. "She rides with me now." Those words had saved her life, but more than that, they had given her a future. Patrick had claimed her that night, not as property but as a partner, as someone worth defending, worth protecting, worth loving. And in doing so, he had shown her what love could be, what marriage could be when it was built on respect and equality and genuine affection. The years passed in a blur of work and family and quiet happiness. James grew into a young man much like his father, tall and serious and kind. Emma was bright and fierce, her mother's daughter in her independence and determination. Patrick's hair began to gray at the temples, and Willa found smile lines around her eyes that had not been there before. They added to the ranch house over time, building a second story with more bedrooms, a proper dining room for their growing family. The original room became just the kitchen and sitting area, cozy and well-worn, the heart of their home. Pictures appeared on the walls, small mementos of their life together. A sketch of the ranch Patrick had commissioned from a traveling artist, photographs of the children at various ages. Pressed flowers from Willa's garden. When James turned 18, Patrick offered to deed him part of the land to start his own herd, but James asked if he could stay and work the ranch as a family instead. Patrick agreed happily, and they built a small cabin for James on the far edge of the property, giving him independence while keeping the family close. Emma announced at 16 that she wanted to be a teacher, and Patrick and Willa scraped together the money to send her to the normal school in Santa Fe. She came home summers full of ideas and enthusiasm, teaching the children in Corona and bringing books back for her parents to read. Through it all, through the good times and the hard, the successful years and the difficult ones when drought or disease threatened the herd, Patrick and Willa remained partners. They still sat on the porch in the evenings when weather allowed, watching the sunset, talking about their day, their children, their plans. Patrick still looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, and Willa still felt her heart skip when he smiled at her a certain way. "Do you ever regret it?" Patrick asked one evening when they were both well into their 50s, their children grown and starting families of their own. "Do you ever wish you had gone somewhere else that night, found a different life?" Willa took his hand, lacing their fingers together. His hands were calloused and scarred from decades of hard work, but they were also gentle, capable of soothing a frightened horse or cradling a newborn baby with equal skill. She had loved these hands for more than 30 years. "Never," she said firmly. "Not once, not for a moment." "You gave me everything, Patrick. A home, a family, a life I could be proud of. How could I regret any of that?" "I did not give you anything," Patrick protested. "You built this life as much as I did. More, maybe. You took a broken-down ranch and a stubborn cowboy and made them into something worth having." "We made it together," Willa corrected. "That is what makes it special. Not what we had, but what we built, who we became together." Patrick pulled her close, kissing her temple. "I love you, Willa Ives. I loved you the first time I saw you running through the desert with the sunset in your hair. I loved you when you came out on the porch with that rifle to defend our home. I loved you when you gave me our children, when you worked beside me through drought and plenty. And I will love you until the day I die and probably beyond that too." "I love you too," Willa said, resting her head on his shoulder. "More than I have words to say." They sat there as the stars came out, the same stars they had watched together for decades, the same mountains rising in the distance, the same wind whispering through the grass. The ranch spread out around them, prosperous and well-tended, a testament to their labor and love. Inside the house, they could hear James and his wife putting their grandchildren to bed, sweet voices raised in the same lullabies Patrick had sung years ago. This was her life now, Willa thought. Not the one she had been born to or the one she had fled from, but the one she had chosen, had built with her own hands and heart. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible on that dark night when she had thought her life was over. Patrick had ridden up and told her she rode with him, and in doing so had given her the greatest gift imaginable, the freedom to choose her own path and a partner to walk it beside her. She had chosen him then, had kept choosing him every day since, and she would keep choosing him for as long as breath remained in her body. The moon rose over the mountains, silver and bright, and somewhere an owl called to its mate. Patrick's arm tightened around her, and Willa closed her eyes, content in a way that went bone deep. This was happiness, she thought. This moment, this man, this life they had created together from nothing but hope and hard work and love that refused to quit. She had been chased from White Oaks as a widow with nothing, and she had found everything she needed right here. Not because she was rescued, but because she had been brave enough to take the hand that was offered, strong enough to build something new from the ashes of what she had lost. Patrick had given her a chance, but she had done the rest herself, with him beside her every step of the way. And that, Willa thought as sleep began to claim her there on the porch in the warm circle of her husband's arms, was the greatest love story of all. Not one of rescue and dependence, but one of partnership and respect and two people who chose each other every single day. That was what made it real, what made it last. That was what made it love. Years continued to pass as they always did, bringing changes both joyful and sad. Patrick's hair went fully silver, and Willa's once dark locks turned gray as well. They moved a bit slower, rose a bit later, but they still worked the ranch together, still found joy in the daily rhythms of their life. James married a sweet girl from Corona and gave them 3 grandchildren. Emma met a lawyer in Santa Fe and settled there, coming home often to visit with her own growing family. The ranch prospered under James's management, and Patrick was content to step back, to advise rather than direct, to spend more time with Willa and their grandchildren. They traveled some in those later years, taking the train to Kansas to see what remained of Patrick's family. To St. Louis, so Willa could visit her parents' graves and show Patrick where she had grown up. But they were always glad to come home, to see the mountains rising in the distance, to smell the sage and pine, to sleep in their own bed under the stars they had watched together for so long. When Patrick was 72, he had a heart episode that scared them both badly. The doctor from Corona said he needed to take it easy, to avoid stress and heavy labor. Patrick grumbled but complied, spending more time in the rocking chair on the porch, watching the ranch carry on without his constant involvement. Willa stayed close, reading to him, bringing him tea, sitting beside him in companionable silence. They played cards in the evening, simple games they had taught their children, and talked about the past, their memories growing softer and sweeter with time. "I would do it all again," Patrick said one afternoon apropos of nothing. "Every moment, every hardship, every joy, I would choose it all again if it meant having you." "I know," Willa said, taking his hand. "I would too." He died peacefully in his sleep one night in early spring, the season of renewal and hope. Willa woke to find him still beside her, his expression calm, as if he had simply drifted away on a pleasant dream. She held his hand for a long time, memorizing the feel of it, the sight of his beloved face at rest. James found her there hours later, still holding his father's hand, tears streaming down her face but her expression peaceful. "He loved you so much, Mama," James said, kneeling beside the bed. I never saw two people more devoted to each other. I know, Willa said, her voice steady despite the tears. I was blessed beyond measure to have him, and he knew it too. We both knew how lucky we were. They buried Patrick on a hill overlooking the ranch, where he could see the mountains and the land he had loved so well. The whole community came to the funeral, testament to the respect and affection Patrick had earned over his lifetime. Willa stood at the graveside, flanked by her children and grandchildren, and spoke of the man who had saved her life and given her a reason to live it fully. "He rode up out of the darkness when I needed him most," she said, her voice carrying in the clear mountain air. "He told the world I rode with him, and in doing so, he gave me back my life. But more than that, he showed me what love could be. He was my partner, my friend, my greatest blessing. And though my heart is broken now, I am grateful for every moment we had together." She lived another 5 years after Patrick died, years spent with her children and grandchildren, tending her garden, keeping the house that had been their home together. James tried to convince her to move in with him and his family, but Willa refused gently. This was her home, hers and Patrick's, filled with memories of their life together. She wanted to stay here, to sit on the porch where they had sat together, to sleep in the bed they had shared. She visited Patrick's grave every day, bringing fresh flowers from her garden in the growing season, evergreen boughs in winter. She would sit beside the grave and talk to him, telling him about the grandchildren, the state of the ranch, small details of her day. Sometimes she would read to him from the books they had loved, or simply sit in silence, feeling close to him there on the hill. When she died, quietly in her sleep at 73, her children found a letter she had left for them. In it, she detailed her wishes to be buried beside Patrick on the hill, and she shared the story of how they had met, the night that had changed everything. She wanted her children and grandchildren to know that love was worth fighting for, worth believing in, worth building a life around. "Your father saved my life," she wrote, "but I saved his too. We saved each other again and again. Every day we chose to stay together, to work together, to love each other. That is what I want you to remember. Not that we never struggled, but that we struggled together. Not that life was always easy, but that we made it beautiful anyway. Love is not just a feeling. It is a choice you make every single day, to put someone else's happiness alongside your own, to build something bigger than either of you could create alone. Your father and I made that choice, and it gave us everything." They buried her beside Patrick, the two graves side by side overlooking the ranch they had built together. The headstones were simple, bearing their names and dates in a single line. "Together forever, as we always were." The ranch continued through James and his children, and their children after them, each generation adding to the legacy Patrick and Willa had created. The house was kept as it had been, a shrine to their memory, and their story was passed down, told and retold until it became part of the family mythology. The widow who was chased from town, and the cowboy who rode up and said she rode with him. The beginning of a love story that spanned decades and created a family that turned pain into purpose and fear into hope. It was a story of choice and courage, of partnership and perseverance, of love that was tested and proved true. And on quiet evenings when the wind blew right across the New Mexico hills, visitors to the graves on the hill would swear they could hear voices, a man and a woman talking softly, laughing together, reliving the life they had shared. Whether it was real or imagination, it brought comfort to those who heard it, a reminder that love like that does not end with death, that some bonds are strong enough to transcend even the grave. Patrick and Willa Ives had lived well and loved deeply, and their story remained as a testament to what was possible when two people chose each other, believed in each other, and built a life together from nothing but hope and determination, and a love that refused to surrender to hardship or fear or the passage of time. They had ridden together through life, and somewhere, somehow they were riding still, together forever in the sunset glow of eternity, their love a bright flame that would never be extinguished, their story a legacy that would endure as long as their family remained to tell it. The end.